Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Collaborative Science for Estuaries webinar series. My name is Nick Sobral. I'm a member of the NERRS Science Collaborative staff. We're glad you can join us for today's webinar, Innovative Approaches to Integrating Research and K-12 Education to Advance Estuary Stewardship. The webinar today is part of our monthly webinar series that features research, integrated assessment, and science transfer projects funded by the Science Collaborative. The National Estuarine Research Reserve System, or NERRS, is a national network of 29 unique research reserves as shown on this map. This is a NOAA program that works in collaboration with a local place-based partner, either a state agency, university, or nonprofit. Each reserve site includes programs focused on land stewardship, research and scientific monitoring, training programs for the public and local officials, and education. The NERRS Science Collaborative supports science for estuarine and coastal decision makers by coordinating regular funding opportunities and supporting user-driven collaborative research, assessment, and transfer activities that address critical coastal management needs identified by the reserves. At the link provided in the chat, you'll find a beta version of a new interactive map that will let you explore a range of science collaborative projects that have included an educational element for K-12 youth and teachers. Several of the projects on the map were led by today's panelists. All attendees are muted upon entry, and we'll be handling questions via the question feature on the GoToWebinar console. We'll have time for questions during the Q&A segment at the end of the webinar. However, we encourage you to submit your questions as they occur to you throughout the webinar by entering them into the questions field on the GoToWebinar console. In an effort to encourage participants to join the discussion and share their suggestions, we've also set up a second mechanism for input during the webinar. In the chat box again, we are sharing a Google document, which is called Sharing Ideas and Resources, where we encourage you to share links to projects, programs, or other resources that people might find helpful, as well as ideas for educational research projects that would build on or benefit your work. Providing your name and email address is optional, but will allow us to follow up with additional questions if needed. And the slide just shows a nice breakdown of the registration as of yesterday. Just to show we have a lovely diversity of different organization types and regions, and we're looking forward to hearing all of your thoughts and sharing ideas with you. So thank you all for joining us today. And with that, I will introduce our moderator for the session. Saranuss has been the education coordinator at the Chesapeake Bay Reserve in Virginia since 2005. In addition to pursuing a PhD in curriculum learning design, Sarah develops education, interpretation, and outreach programs for a range of audiences. And one current area of interest is professional development for graduate students and pre-service teachers. She has led several science collaborative projects, including climate education for a changing bay expansion and creating an alliance of scientists and educators in Virginia. Sarah, I'll pass it over to you now.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Or Nick, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
All right, well, hello everyone. As Nick said, I am Sarah Nuss, and I'm the education coordinator at the Chesapeake Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve in Virginia. And I'm really excited to be moderating this session today and to be a part of this wonderful group of my colleagues. So I've worked with all three of our panelists today, and I also have worked with the Science Collaborative on a number of projects. And so it's great to just be able to share this time with all of them and to share our work with you all. We're also really excited that so many of you were interested in this webinar today. And the topic is something that I feel the NERRS is especially poised to tackle. One of our goals as education coordinators is to translate the science that's happening at our reserve, whether that's through our research program or our stewardship program, and to bring that to other audiences. And for the education coordinators, that usually means K through 12 students or teachers, the public, and sometimes pre-service teachers. And so our webinar today is really twofold. First, we want to share some of the innovative projects that we've worked on, and I'll be sharing a little bit about mine as well as our three panelists. We really want to inspire you with some new ideas. I know that every time we have our NERRS annual meeting and I get to hear what my colleagues around the country are doing, it always inspires me to create new projects in Virginia. Because even though we're all part of one system, we all are unique and have our own audiences and our own target focus areas. So we hope that we inspire you with some of our projects, but we also are really looking to brainstorm with you, and we hope to make this as interactive as possible. Like we mentioned, we have these Google Docs that are going to be going on during the webinar. So if you have resources to share, a project that fits this topic, or one aspect of the webinar we're going to bring in is educational research. So how can we move the field of environmental education forward, including conducting research on some of these existing innovative projects and programs. We're also lastly going to focus a little bit on how to adapt some of these programs to our changing world and bringing in a virtual platform for disseminating some of this research into K-12 audiences. So we hope that we're going to have a great discussion and that you all will interact and ask questions and submit ideas in the Google Doc. You can even submit your contact information if you're interested in working with one of us on a project. And yeah, we're just excited to get started. So before we start with the panelists, we do have 2 quick poll questions, and these are just to get to know our audience a little bit better. So if everyone will take a moment to answer the first poll question, which is, what role have you played in K-12 educational efforts? And you can select more than one. Okay, so it looks like we're fairly even with the first 3, working with youth, teachers, or involved in coastal research and management, and about 20% research about teaching and learning, so that's great. Our second poll question, we'll go ahead and pull that one up. Which of these topics is most interesting to you? And you can select one or more. How to start a new idea, innovative techniques for youth, for teachers, or ideas for research about teaching and learning, and lastly, adapting to social distancing guidelines. Okay, looks like most people are interested in reaching youth, teachers, social distancing. All of these things we're going to touch on, so that's great. I'm glad that everybody's interested in the topics for our webinar today. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. I'm going to tell a little bit about what I do at CB in Virginia, and then introduce the 3 panelists that will also be sharing their projects. So in Virginia, just really briefly, I wanted to highlight some of the ways that we have integrated research into our K-12 program. So the large picture in the middle is our Virginia Sea project. That is the Virginia Scientists and Educators Alliance, where we train graduate students on how to write lesson plans that are then given to K-12 teachers in our area. So that has been very successful. We're on our 3rd year of that project, and we run that project in conjunction with the VIMS Marine Advisory Program, which is another set of educators on the VIMS campus. But we've also had some other projects. The top right is integrating our stewardship, sea level rise monitoring work with high school students, and that was a climate education program that we have run with local high school students. And then in the bottom right hand corner is Stephanie Letourneau, and she was our Noah Holling Scholar last summer, and we worked with her. I was her co-mentor with our stewardship coordinator, and we worked to translate some of the work that our stewardship coordinator was doing with thin layer placement as a restoration technique and how to translate that to a K-12 audience. And so Stephanie wrote a lesson plan and created a story map, which we then conducted an educational research project on to see which teachers preferred. So there have been some ways to introduce educational research into our programs as well. So but that's very briefly a few examples of some of the ways we have incorporated research into our programs. But we have 3 other panelists that will be talking with you today. 2 of which are NERRS education coordinators, and I've worked with them for a long time. Julie Benz is our education coordinator from Charleston, South Carolina, and Joan Muller is the education coordinator in Wacoit Bay, Massachusetts. And then our 3rd panelist is Elizabeth Edmondson, and she is a faculty member at Virginia Commonwealth University, and conducts research on learning, teaching and learning, and also is a partner with me in an upcoming project to teach pre-service teachers how to conduct outdoor investigations. So we're really excited to hear from them, and we are going to start with Julie, and she's going to be focused on youth-oriented programs.
Hi everyone. Thanks for having me. My name's Julie Benz. I am the education coordinator at the ACE base in NERRS, which is in the southern portion of South Carolina, just below Charleston. And I'm going to tell you about a project that is 10 years old now that is called From Seeds to Shoreline. It's a student-centered salt marsh restoration program. So the students participate in every aspect of growing Spartina grass, which is our dominant salt marsh grass, growing it in the classroom. Nick, could you progress a slide? I have some photos of them. So they participate in every aspect. On the left, they're harvesting the seeds from the marsh. In the fall, they grow them in greenhouses all throughout the school year at school. And then they take their new baby marsh grass plants and we plant them together in an area of eroded marsh. So this program has many layers, and we've expanded it over the years to involve many different partners and many different schools. And a few years ago, we received a science transfer grant. While we had the program functioning all along the coast in South Carolina, we had also expanded it to North Carolina and Georgia. But one of the other NERRS in northern Florida, the GTM Reserve, was experimenting on growing Spartina grass hydroponically. So we applied and received a science transfer grant, and they helped teach us in our schools how to grow plants hydroponically, which you can see in a pool in the bottom. And we helped them to learn how to grow from seed. So now we've involved all of our southeastern reserves in this project, as well as all of the South Carolina Sea Grant educators. We've got lots of partners. South Carolina Sea Grant started this program in South Carolina, so they immediately contacted the ACE base in NERRS and our state agency, the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, as original partners. So the Sea Grant and NERRS partnership was just natural for the other southeastern states as well, and that's allowed us to expand to the whole region. One of the things that has been really exciting in the past few years, and because of this extension with the hydroponics option, is it really gives the opportunity for the students to conduct lots of their own experiments. Lots of them test different growing mediums or different watering techniques. They're using different substrate in the pool, in the hydroponic pool, and they can compare their results, so they can learn how to design experiments and conduct them. And then they're also helping us learn better ways to grow the Spartina. So we've used a lot of the methods that the students and teachers have discovered to tweak our techniques so that we get better growth success. You could, next slide, please. We even last year had a group of high school students involved in monitoring one of our sites. So they worked with me and our shellfish research section at the Department of Natural Resources. Here they were learning how we use drones to monitor the site, and they did little quadrat studies on stem density. So they were doing restoration research to see how successful a site was. And that was the same site that the students in the younger grades of that school had planted. So the younger students conduct the Seize the Shoreline program and grow the grass in school and restore the marsh. And then these high school students learned how to monitor. And then they actually presented their results at one of our scientific conferences. So they practiced doing that and presenting as well.
Thanks, Julie. We're going to turn it over to Joan to introduce her project, which focuses on in-service teachers.
Hello. Yes, my name's Joan Muller, and I'm the education coordinator on at the White Bay Reserve, which is on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And all of our projects that we worked with the NERRS Science Collaborative with have focused on the Teachers on the Estuary workshops, which are workshops that are held at all the research reserves throughout the country. And this particular slide is focusing on a project that we've been working on. We got a transfer grant. We've been working with the reserve in Wells, Maine, as well as the one in Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island, and actually 5 schools for the deaf in these 3 states, and also Boston University Deaf Education Program and the Learning Center, Center for Research and Training. And so we've been able to provide Teachers on the Estuary workshops for the teachers from those schools, the pre-service teachers who go into Boston University, and as well as the sign language interpreters. And in order to do that, we were working with a team that has been doing this project called ASL Clear, where they create conceptual signs, ASL signs, for scientific words that were usually fingerspelled all along. So this that's what we've been doing for this project. And next slide. And we've also gotten, well, we got a transfer grant to work on curriculum when our reserve had a larger collaborative science research grant working on blue carbon topics. It was called Bringing Wetlands to Market. And we worked with the South Slough Reserve in Oregon to create a curriculum based on the concepts from this project. And we were able to pilot it at 2 Teachers on the Estuary workshops on either coast. And now the curriculum is posted online for everybody to use. And we also, I guess I'll go to the next slide. And one that we got last year, or that we did last year, was it was part of a larger science research collaborative grant where the research was focusing on oyster aquaculture, and it was happening at our site. So as part of the grant, they made an education aquaculture demonstration site that we could use with, we could use it with students and teachers and community members. And we also used it for a teacher workshop. And the teachers, when we had of course we had the researchers presenting during the workshop, and then when the teachers came back to show us what they had done in the classroom, like 2nd grade teachers had used oysters as a way to study adaptations, and did some oyster filtering experiments in their classroom, where high school groups actually, went out with their shellfish warden from their town and helped them do research. So teachers from all different grade levels were able to adapt the information to be able to use it.
Thank you, Joan. And our last panelist is Elizabeth Edmondson, and she's going to be introducing some work that she does with pre-service teachers.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Edmondson, and as you all have heard, I'm at Virginia Commonwealth University, which is in Richmond, Virginia, on the beautiful James River. I am very happy to be a part of a pre-service project that we're starting up. It's called Virginia Tides. It's a multi-university Bay Watershed Education Training Grant through NOAA, otherwise known as a BWET grant. That's being led by the CB NERRS and the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. Just to give you a little background, I've been working with pre-service teachers for about 10 years. I actually began working with pre-service teachers at the elementary level for 5 or 6 years, and we would, I always involved my students in the outdoors. I was able to get several small grants that helped us work with an after-school program of students outdoors, and then sometimes during the school day. This is kind of an interesting role for me because I had actually been a high school teacher. And so as a high school teacher, I now have a former high school teacher. I now have worked with that level of pre-service students for about 4 years here in Richmond. So I've really worked the whole spectrum, which is really nice. It's really fun to do that. My pre-service students are pretty much a diverse group of students. I have everything from biology to chemistry to physics, earth science. I have some that want to teach middle school. I have some that want to teach high school. And so that mix is really interesting. And one of the things that I've always done is taken my students out to the James River at least one class period. I know that's not enough, but there's lots of things for us to get them ready for their classrooms. But we've gone out to the James River and we talk about outdoor education and field trips, and I try to make them comfortable with the idea of how they can engage their students outdoors, and it doesn't have to be scary or threatening or anything like that. But I always have felt like that really wasn't enough. And Sarah and I met at a state science teachers conference, and she mentioned this possibility of going after this BWET NOAA grant. And I said, well, if you need another school, I would love to talk with you more. And that's what we did. We talked some more. And so now we have this Virginia Tides grant, and we're beginning it. We just met today to talk about some logistics. The project actually is based on one that they have had with William and Mary, the College of William and Mary, and we're adding 4 additional schools to this project. Their goal is to get our pre-service teachers, not only in science, but math and social studies, we hope, to really understand and develop some self-efficacy related to planning meaningful watershed educational experiences. We call them MeWEs here, and so if I slip into that lingo, I apologize. They also really want the faculty to better understand how they can incorporate these sorts of projects, and the faculty that are involved have varying experiences with working with students outdoors. They also would like to build a network of pre-service students who are going to be our new professionals in not too distant future, so that when they get into the classroom, they have others that they can call upon and work with, and to continue this work so that they don't sort of learn it, practice it while they're in their student teaching experiences, and then let it go. So this network is going to hopefully be really important. Just to let you know, I'm also part of 2 other BWET grants that are with middle school teachers. One I'm the evaluator for, and one I am actually the co-PI, and we are trying to get our teachers to implement more outdoor work with students and advocacy work. We really want them to be advocates for the environment. And so now this project with the Virginia Tides is going to let me expand my pre-service and broaden that experience. And so I'm really excited about this opportunity, and we'll have more that we can share next year.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I hope that everyone is, your gears are turning and you're thinking about different projects that maybe you could create that are similar to the ones that have been shared. If you have questions, please put them in the question box. We have a few questions that we came up with prior to the webinar starting, and we're going to start with those to give you some time. But also, if you have any comments about any of the projects that we've already mentioned, just a reminder that you can also put comments in the Google slide or the Google Doc. So our first question, I'm going to give this one to Julie, is just to tell us a bit more about how your project emerged. So how did you identify that this was a need and that this audience was a good audience for the project? How did these partnerships get developed?
Sure. Well, as I had said before, the project's 10 years old, and it was started by the educator at South Carolina Sea Grant because there was no other student opportunity to restore salt marshes. She really saw that need, and she immediately realized she wanted some partners involved to help in this project. So it started with one school. And like I said, she enlisted the ACE Basin educators, staff, and also our South Carolina Department of Natural Resources has a oyster restoration team that are partners and have been since the beginning. And then Clemson Extension's our agriculture university in the state, and they have access to greenhouses and expertise on growing plants. So we all had our strengths and all the resources that we could bring to this project. And they started it out with one school, and now we average 30 to 40 per year because we all work together and we all divvy up the responsibilities, and the schools that we are in contact with, we're able to reach over 2,000 kids a year. As we had said, once we entered into a project, and that was a few years ago, was an EPA grant that allowed us to expand to North Carolina and Georgia through the reserves there and the sea grants there. So then it allowed us to expand schools again. And then the science transfer opportunity also allowed us to then partner with our Northern Florida NER GTM so that we could all bring our specific expertise. When we expanded to North Carolina and Georgia, we also expanded within the state. So then we created what we call hubs that are all of our other environmental ed centers. We have state parks involved, we have county parks involved, we have nature centers involved, and they provide an extra layer of support too. So they might grow some grass for us in greenhouses, or they may provide field trips for students that are involved in this program so that we aren't doing all of it. So that all always allows us to expand our reach. So we've found people with common goals and all different resources that they can bring to the project. And that's how we've made it expand so much in the 10 years and how we can reach so many students.
Awesome, thank you. It sounds like your project really came directly from a need with the students. And I'm wondering if, Joan, maybe you have any ideas of best practices for these types of projects in working with researchers, and maybe an idea generating from the research side.
Sure. Well, the first time we did that blue carbon doing the curriculum, we weren't in the first main grant. You know, we had to apply for our own transfer grant just for education. But then the next time, you know, we worked with the researchers. They were presenters in the workshops. we had them review the curriculum that we did and all that. So the next time they actually asked us to be part of the main Part 2 grant, and then we were able to focus in on making some activities, data activities with the actual data that, whereas in the first part of the research project, the data wasn't really ready yet to make it into activities. So we worked closely with one of the researchers to some of her core data to make that into an activity, and then with the modelers to make an activity where the students could actually collect their own data in the salt marsh and then use the same model that the that resource managers were going to be using to figure out how much carbon could be sequestered and stored in that marsh. And so that's working with the researchers. So we, you know, we really incorporated them in reviewing and creating ideas. We also, one I didn't mention was that we did one with Sentinel sites data. And actually one of the ideas came from our stewardship coordinator to make a student Sentinel site where the students would monitor something near their school, or and get the concept behind the reserves are monitoring salt marshes to see what's happening with sea level rise. So that's how we've been working with researchers. Again, in the Oyster one, they asked us to participate in that, and they put funding in it. If they don't ask us, we sometimes like, hey, remember us? We could do something too. So yeah, as far as the researchers, and we did, as far as working with partners, it was really important in that in our working with the deaf students to have, we had, well, I first contacted a professor at BU about this project, and he said, oh, if you want to do these teacher workshops, you've really got to contact this other woman who's doing this ASL Clear program where they're creating conceptual signs, because really this is a barrier, not having signs, having to just fingerspell terms. And from there, we got connected with deaf scientists, and really those partnerships were really crucial, you know, right from the beginning to make sure it was successful.
Thanks, Joan. I'm going to invite Elizabeth and myself to turn our videos on so that we can all see each other for the discussion. Elizabeth, do you have anything else to add in terms of how to identify partnerships for projects?
Well, I think one thing that's kind of different about the grant, Sarah, that you and I are going to work on is that, and this is true of many states have science teachers conferences. And it's a great way to go present what you're doing, and a great way to meet faculty from other universities that are working with teachers. And so it's a great way to start those collaborations. And that's really how ours started, is you were telling us about this work that you had done with the College of William and Mary. And we were all like, ooh, we would love to do that too. So, you know, there's lots of ways to start those partnerships. And going to conferences that maybe you don't normally go to is a really great way.
Yeah, networking is very important. And pre-service teachers is a newer audience, I would say, for the NERRS system. We've talked about it at a couple of our annual meetings, and some of us are working with pre-service teachers, but just thinking outside the box of who we could share our work with, I think, is important.
And the research would certainly say that that's a perfect group to work with, because there's not much work that's been done there.
Yeah, great. So our next question is kind of focused on the social distancing and our change to virtual programs, such as this webinar. So I'm wondering if anyone has any alternative techniques that have seemed to be working. And I'm going to start with Joan, because I know Joan has recently hosted a Teachers on the Estuary workshop during this time. So just any advice for people that are looking to translate their programs virtually?
Sure. Well, we started small. We just did like 1-hour webinar to test it out, and which focused on getting students outside in their own backyards, or if they don't have a backyard, at least looking out windows and doing real science, because we just saw all these links to all these, you know, online things. And so that was good, starting small, only an hour. We had one of our former TOTE teachers who had gone to the Sentinel sites workshop, happened to be a remote teacher herself. And so she shared how she had already been using this concept of having a student Sentinel site in their own backyard. She'd been doing that since the time she took the workshop several years ago. So I think it's also good to use teachers to talk to teachers. They really responded to that really well. And they also seem to like being able to talk to each other and say, you know, what was bothering them, what barriers, and giving each other suggestions. That seemed like nice to have a real time offering for them. And then we did do another one, again, in collaboration with our monitoring technician, where she trained how to use the water quality monitoring data online. And then after we tried 2 short ones, we called it TOTE Remote, and it was several sessions, but we still kept them short, like 1.5-hour sessions once a week. And each session we had a certain a guest presenter. One week it was our research coordinator who was actually used some data, materials from a project, another science collaborative project that Kim Cressman had worked on with the Sentinel site data. And then we also had a live portion out in our marsh where our stewardship coordinator gave a tour of our Sentinel site. This was focused on our Sentinel site curriculum, and they loved that, and they thought that was a good idea. Maybe they could somehow do that for their own students. So I think having it not too long, keeping it short, once a week, having the outdoor segment, they loved that. And we also did a segment where we had Zoom rooms and they got to discuss with teachers who were teaching things similar to themselves. So I guess that, you know, we tried to make it interactive using some of the whiteboard features and polls and things like that. So. Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Sorry. Anyone else have any tips for virtual learning best practices or something that worked really well?
We, throughout the spring, when school closed in March, all of our schools were growing these grasses, and we were like, what are we gonna do with them all? Because normally we have thousands of children planting them, and I wasn't going to, we weren't gonna let them die. We weren't gonna do that. So we actually took them from the schools that had plants, and all of the partners made a video so that they could show the students what contribution their project had. And we as staff planted every single plant in the marsh. So that took a lot of modification from the way we usually do things. But now we have a nice video that explains the project, explains the salt marsh, we're out in the marsh, why we plant the grass, how we plant the grass, what it looks like, and things like that. So we decided to punt to that for the end of the school year, just so the kids could see the fruits of their labor. And we did, for schools that were interested, did have interactive live virtual field trips with them. So we were out there and we had some, we have some animals, educational animals. So we're teaching them about that. And they can ask questions and things on a GoToMeeting. So that's what we ended up doing for the spring when schools closed.
Seems like one of the side benefits of this whole thing is we're going to end up with a ton of resources, videos, virtual field trips,
products that we did not have.
Right. And we can offer to students that can't visit our NERRS site specifically. So that's actually been a very positive part of it for us.
Yeah.
I noticed that it was actually easier to get, people signed up really fast. I didn't advertise it very much. I guess it's less of a, less effort to attend.
Yeah.
Also, some you know, teachers from farther away or from urban centers also signed up, which may not have happened, you know, if we had a 3-day workshop in the summer. So there were, and it's also it's less expensive too. But so there are advantages.
Yeah, I agree. We've seen similar things. I know we don't have a ton of time. I want to get this last question in before we open it up to the audience's questions. This is just a personal interest of mine. I know some of the education coordinators are also very interested in it, but conducting some research on all of our programs. Some of us have been in the reserve system for a really long time. We've had programs like Julie's that have been in existence for a really long time. And so really looking at what impact do these programs have on the students and the teachers that we're working with. So I'm wondering, Elizabeth, if you have any thoughts, you know, after you've heard some of these projects, what questions, what research questions do you think the NERRS in particular might be well poised to tackle? And to our audience members, if you think of any, also feel free to put those in that Google Doc. This is something that we've been talking about for a while and seeing if we can create a research grant through the Science Collaborative even that focuses on educational research. So Elizabeth, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Yeah. Environmental education is a rich area for research. It's not my primary area, but it really is a rich area. And as I mentioned earlier to you all, the pre-service area in environmental ed is really a ripe area to look at. You know, how is this experience at the pre-service level impacting what they actually do, and are we having more impact because they've had that experience earlier? Most of the research that's out there is with practicing teachers and students in both formal and informal settings, and that's great. And actually there's a lot of international work that's quite interesting. So I think, Sarah, you mentioned it. What's the impact of your program? I think we often look at what happens while they're there with us. What, you know, we kind of do a pre-thing as they come in and we finish our week or a couple of days and we do it at the end. And that's a short-term impact. But I think one of the questions is, what is it that they actually take back to their schools and use? And what are the barriers that they face when they go back to school? Why don't they, you know, we give them these wonderful programs. I've done professional development for years, and we think, oh, this is great. You know, we've done all this stuff with problem-based learning here at VCU. And then the teachers get into the classroom and there are barriers that keep them from doing that. So, you know, not only looking at what the participants get out of the program during the program, but, you know, what is it that they carry forward long term? And, you know, and what seems to be the barriers to doing more? Is it maybe needing a teammate? So maybe looking at grants that have individual teachers versus projects that have teams of teachers. I think that interdisciplinary piece is really, really important, because then teachers have somebody to go back to their building with to you know, to troubleshoot with, and they're not kind of there alone. So looking at, you know, setting up your project so that you've got a variety of different delivery modes in terms of, you've got single teacher, isolated teachers, you've got teachers in teams of the same content, you could have teachers from different contents and compare those. When you start to think about this, you know, what is it that we're changing? Are we changing their attitudes towards the environment? Hopefully that's a primary to begin with. Are we helping them to understand the issues? Are they still nervous about the issues? And, you know, one of the things that teachers really hate is to not know the answer. I always tell them, that's what the internet's for now. You know, you don't have to be the expert all the time. And my students frequently thought I needed to be a medical doctor. And if I knew that, I wouldn't be here, you know? So it's all about teaching kids, that's a really good question. Why don't you go do some research? Or this group of students, why don't you go do some more work on that? The other is to look at their practices. Are you teaching them a way of looking at the world that's different, and do they translate those practices? You know, when you look at grants, though, one of the things that they really want to see is what are student learning outcomes. And that's harder to do because that takes another level of district permission to collect data on students once they return from field visits, but it's a really important piece of it, and it's what a lot of grants want to see, but it's certainly very doable. And then hooking up with your colleges of education, you know, to actually have a methodologist that could help you with looking at the data. There's lots of tools. I noticed as I was looking through some things again today, there's a wonderful new guide that NAAE put out. It's a practitioner's guide to assessing the connection to nature. And so that is a wonderful guide to different kinds of tools that you can use that are simple. Either paper, if you can do it digital, it saves you a lot of time. So there's lots of possibilities out there.
Right, yeah, sounds like lots of opportunities. I'm gonna check with Nick and see if we want to take a question from the audience.
Yeah, we do have a few questions rolling in. So far, there are some specific ones that are geared towards some of the speakers' comments. The first one might be good to start with. Somebody here is actually unfamiliar with the Sentinel site program. As somebody who also came from outside the reserve system, I know that I also frequently find myself asking these kinds of questions. So does one of you want to elaborate a bit on the Sentinel sites for those who might be unfamiliar?
Dawn, you want to take that one?
All right, it's a system of sort of monitoring that's going on at all the different research reserves, and to see, you know, what's changing at the reserves. And the first one that they've been focusing on is one on sea level rise and salt marshes and what's happening to do with that. Is that fair enough, Julie and Sarah?
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. Joan, we have another question while we got your attention here that is asking about how the whiteboard worked for you. Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Well, we used the whiteboard, the Zoom had a whiteboard, and we showed a little NOAA video about estuaries and values of estuaries, and then we asked them to, they could all type on the whiteboard things that why they valued estuaries. So that was just one way that we used it, but you could brainstorm on it, but they can type on it simultaneously all at once.
Thank you. We have a couple questions about specific resources that were mentioned. So at this point, I'd like to just remind the audience that Google Doc that we shared at the beginning, the Sharing Ideas one, actually has most of these, if not all of these resources listed in it. So just a reminder that you can put your ideas and suggestions in there as well, and any resources that you might be asking for are likely in there. And if not, feel free to send us a message, and we'll add it to that document as well. And we'll leave that document open too after the webinar in case people are looking for those resources. So another question here for Julie to elaborate on. First, there was a comment that somebody else had similar experiences with their own grasses, and they said that there was a challenge at the classroom program in Virginia Beach. It was challenging. They only had 2,500 plants. And then there's another question asking how much grass is grown annually through this program?
And this is where we lean on our own facilities and a lot of our hubs. A lot of them have more elaborate greenhouses, and we grow backup plants. So if the kids' plants all fail, they still can go out in the marsh and plant plants, because that's usually the end of the year field trip, and that's big and exciting. This year we had 66,000 seedlings.
Wow.
We grow a lot of plants, and a majority of that are hubs our other environmental ed centers grown plants. We have a greenhouse and grow plants, and a large majority of that is our oyster restoration staff, where they are doing a lot of living shorelines work, and they're really good at it. And so they have 3 greenhouses and grow a ton of plants, and we use those as backup when the children don't have enough.
Good idea.
Yeah, nice.
Another question for Julie about, have you had any success with growing Spartina from clippings or only seeds?
That's how we grow it hydroponically, is rhizomatically. So if we have clumps that have the root structure there, and you put them in the baskets in the hydroponic system, and then they're growing offshoots from the roots. So we can grow them hydroponically that way, or from seed hydroponically.
Excellent. Pivoting to another topic, we have a question here about the oyster experiments. So somebody wants to know if they are if they need cooled water, or does room temperature work? And then they said that our Pacific oysters needed cold water.
I don't know. We use water from the bay, so it was around the same temperature, So I don't know. We also wondered what would make a difference, like if you were keeping the oysters overnight in the refrigerator, would they be hungrier, or should you not? So I don't have a lot of good, specific information on that. We just took them from the bay, and often they had been in the refrigerator before, and then I guess we let them up to yeah. I am not sure on the answer to that.
Question for Elizabeth. Somebody was asking what that guide you mentioned was called. I think are they referring to the MIWI guide? Maybe I can drop a link into that, or a different guide.
No, I think this is through NAAEE. It's called the Practitioner's Guide to Assessing Connection to Nature. And I'll make sure it's in the document when we get
Excellent.
off.
Thank you.
Yes. But there is a MIWI guide too.
I remember seeing that one, so I'm balancing a lot of things right now. Julie, I know you mentioned that you, a couple things about moving your project forward in the virtual world. Did you want to elaborate a bit more on what sort of things you might be thinking about for converting more of your project to a virtual environment if needed?
We talked a lot about, well, we also have, because again, this project has a lot of moving pieces. A while ago, we created an online southeastern salt marsh field guide with our researchers. So we have an online field guide, which we had before any of this happened, and posters and coloring books for younger ages and different age ranges. So we have lots of different products. We have our website that we created for the science transfer project, and that's definitely on the document list. It's spreading the seeds of estuary health, and we have lots and lots of lesson plans that have to do with ecosystems and salt marshes on that website. So we made all of the resources that we use with the teachers and asked the teachers to use all accessible online, which we did beforehand. But we did a lot of talking as far as moving forward for this school year. If we are in a distance learning situation, actually doing a lot more of support for families and parents, and helping our parents also become teachers, and work with students on discovering the salt marsh, which they can do as well alongside their children, and maybe help out with the project in some way. So we've talked about a lot of ways where we incorporate the whole family now, and the community members as a whole, not just students and in their classroom with their teacher.
Thinking, Julie, about I think it was Julie, your picture that showed the squares, the PVC squares, to look at what's in that area. That's a great idea, smaller or whatnot, for parents to take outside and do with their kids just in the backyard, and to watch how a particular area changes through the seasons. And since, you know, we'll be going through that seasonal change, I hope. Kind of hot here in Virginia right now, but you know, that'd be a great sort of thing to translate. What do you see in your backyard? How does it compare to, say, looking at the marsh area?
Yeah, the spring when we had that workshop, we also had a second grade teacher talking about her students just watching spring coming, and they picked a little area and just watched it, and she said they loved it. So
Got about 5 minutes left. I know that we had wanted to leave some time aside for our speakers to give the last little bit of advice. So if you all would like to make a comment here, and I'll leave it to Julie to set that question up. Or if you would like, I can pose the question as well.
I
We're just
know
going to
that-
ask one piece of advice that you would give to someone that is starting a new educational partnership.
You want me to go first?
Sure.
I would say to incorporate your partners early before you have a very firm idea in your head, and think about what everyone can bring to the table so that you're all creating the project together and not trying to fit people into roles that maybe aren't the best for them.
you can go next if you want.
Go ahead, Joan.
So I would have said what Julie said as my, oh, sorry, it's going the wrong way. Anyway, as my number one, but they also wanted me to say, like, how do you work with researchers? How do you get them to work with you? So my tip for that is volunteer to help them. Volunteer to help them out in the field, you know, when they need extra hands to collect their data. Volunteer your staff, you know, you or your staff, interns, seasonal interpreters. It's great for you because you learn a lot, and your programs are better because you have a deeper knowledge and you can ask them questions the whole time. And then it's also makes it more of a two-way street. So, you know, it's not always you asking them to be the presenter or review this or review that. So that's my tip for working with researchers.
Yeah, I think all of those are really great. And I think if you want to do research on your program, finding a graduate student, possibly at one of your local universities, that is looking for a project or looking for a way to start building a name for themselves is a great thing to think about too.
And I think I would add just to be flexible. I mean, right now, especially, we had great ideas for our BWEC grant, and there will be a great program that will come out of it, but it will look very different than what we proposed. So, you know, you have to be flexible when you're working with partners and what works for them and what's happening in the world. But there's still a way to make it a great program. So that would be my advice, is to be flexible.
Great advice, everyone. Thank you. Just a couple closing housekeeping comments here. There is no webinar next month scheduled. We are taking a short break for the month of August, but we'll be back, so stay tuned for webinar announcements. A couple of products that were released recently and coming soon. The summary report from the May webinar is on the way. It's being finalized as we speak. So that webinar in May was about virtual engagement, virtual collaborative science, and the summary report that's on the way has key points from the panelists' remarks and discussion, provides a comprehensive set of common challenges for virtual meetings and collaborative science, some useful strategies and techniques, helpful tools, resources, collected from panelists and participants before, during, and after the webinar, and it is very comprehensive. So I encourage you to look at that if you also still have questions about virtual engagement. We're all still navigating the landscape as well, but it's nothing like crowdsourcing a problem when you have a challenge like this. We also recently released a beta version of on our website called Collections, which are curated sets of projects. So the link we dropped in the beginning was the link to this beta version of the map, and the collection that we featured earlier was the K-12 panel 1 to go with this webinar. So it's just a kind of a new way to search our project catalog and resource library. So if you have further questions about some of these projects that were mentioned, feel free to check out that new feature on the website. Both those resources are shown on the slide here, and they were also in the chat, and they are in that Google document as well. So with that, I will end with a big thank you to our panelists and to our moderator for their excellent work in preparation for this webinar. And a big thank you to all of you panelists and to all participants for attending and participating and giving such great ideas and asking such great questions. So thank you all. I hope everyone is staying healthy, staying safe, and enjoying some of the summer as best they can. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.